Well, I wanted to, talk about a number of things, but I entitled the live stream, What Will Be Success This Year for the 49ers? And it's funny. I mean, we're so geared to, I like the same way that Jed is geared for this, and Shanahan, you feel, is geared for it. And Lynch, is only sticking around for this. And it's all about not just winning, it's not about making the playoffs. It's not about being 500. It's not about winning a playoff game. It's not about making it to the NFC Championship game. It's not about making it to the Super Bowl. It's about securing the 6th Lombardi trophy, winning the Super Bowl. And in my opinion, anything short of that is not going to be viewed as success. And that's a lonely lane to be in. That's a tough standard. I think we all have to kind of realize here in June, a month before camp, that when you have that standard of you win the Super Bowl or it hasn't been a success, it creates tension. It creates anxiety. It sets the bar at its highest level. There's very few teams in the NFL that have that standard, honestly, if they were being truly honest with themselves. Maybe the Niners, maybe the Chiefs and Eagles. I think everybody else is like, hey, the playoffs would be good, or the championship game would be good. Not so with the Niners, Chiefs, and Eagles. What do you think of that standard of you win the Super Bowl or it hasn't been a successful year?
Yeah, that's where the 49ers have been for a long time. It hasn't, going back into the days of DeBartolo, right? But where they are right now under Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, especially after the last 4 years with, a trip to the Super Bowl, a couple of back-to-back NFC Championship games, you look at this roster, you look at everything that they've put together, and if this team isn't in the Super Bowl holding the Lombardi trophy at the end of the year, I do agree with you that this would be a failure of a season. I mean, they're still going to, it still could be a good season, but in terms of overall what their goals are this year, the goal is always to win the Super Bowl. But I think this year in 2023, with everything that's going on in terms of the players that they've brought in, they're still in the middle of a solid window, but you have a couple of these key guys that are getting a little bit longer in the tooth in terms of their contracts and so on. So I think this year the 49ers really need to come out with the Lombardi trophy at the end of the year for it to be able to be ruled as a success.
I mean, where do you think that comes from, that expectation? Does it come from Jed because Jed wants that elusive 6th, which would be his first running the franchise? Is that fire lit? I mean, I would say I was watching the Jerry Rice Football Life last night. And it was so clear there were sprinkles of Eddie D in there. And it was like Niner night on the NFL Network. They had highlights of the Super Bowl 23, Super Bowl 24. And it just took me back to the 80s and 90s. And it just was a reminder that in so many ways, despite Walsh and Ronnie and Joe and Jerry and Charles and, all the different awesome players and coaches the Niners had, it was Eddie D who really kind of fueled it's Super Bowl or bust kind of a thing. He was in some ways the guy who set the standard. Who do you think sets the standard for the Niners? Is it us, the media? Is it the fans because of the history of the franchise? Who is driving the standard in the present for the 49ers?
I think in the present it's coming mostly from the two guys at the top in terms of the football side of it. And I'm saying that as far as Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. I think they're the ones that really drive it. Jed York talks a big game at times, but then he also was giving out contract extensions to these guys after a Super Bowl loss and those types of things. So I think it really comes no more from Lynch and Shanahan. They both, I think, see this window as open, but starting to narrow. And I think that they realize that if they're going to get one for their own legacy in terms of their position as a coach and as a front office executive, I think they both realize that they need to get over the hump and actually get this thing to the finish line for a change. So I think it's really coming from those two. I'm sure there's a little bit of it coming from Jed York, but I think it's coming more from the other two.
one other thing that just absolutely screamed out to me, Khalil Young, by the way, says, I was watching the same thing, Larry. Yeah, I mean, it was a great night. Anytime I see, it was like Super Bowl highlights of the Niners, then Football Life, Jerry, then Football Life, Ronnie, then Football Life, Dwight Clark. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I want to switch the channel, but I'm like, you know what? I don't want to switch the channel. I've watched all these shows before. Then finally I did switch the channel, but I taped the DC Football Life. But watching the Ronnie and Jerry one, it was pretty clear. I mean, Steve Young had a great line at the end of the Jerry Football Life where he's like, "Hey man, it was 3 days after we won the Super Bowl, and I go to the facility and there's nobody there, and there's hardly anybody in the office. There's nobody in the locker room, and I go over to the one of the windows. I look down on the field, and Jerry is running patterns." And it was like for Steve, he was like, that to me was just a glimpse of what made Jerry Jerry. And then I watched the Ronnie Football Life, and I mean, it's so obvious that Ronnie was a tone setter player. Jerry was a tone setter player to the point where when the Niners had a Deion Sanders, it was like, hey, Deion, you got, Jerry even says it in the thing, you've got baggage. We show up and work, and the strong point from Deion was like, Jerry didn't enjoy the ride, man. Jerry just didn't enjoy the ride. And Deion wanted to enjoy the ride. Different personality types. But watching Jerry and watching Ronnie, it was a reminder that the 49er players also had their own, we play to this standard, and you either play to our standard or there's the effing door. You know what I mean? And I'm kind of wondering from your perspective, I've got a couple ideas, but we're in the locker room. We talk to the players. We're on the field. We see the interactions. Who are the tone setting players for the 49ers currently? Who are the guys that are like, you know what? This is the way we practice. This is the way we prepare. This is the way we play. And I'm going to play at this standard. And if you don't meet it, you're not here. Who's today's Ronnie? Who's today's Jerry?
Well, I think that today's Jerry is Christian McCaffrey. By what we've seen of him just in the short time, we didn't really get to watch much of him last year, the way, because he came in the middle of the season. But just watching the way that he's worked during OTAs and minicamp, it's reminiscent of the stories you've heard about Jerry Rice and the way that he would, it was full go every play, taking the ball to the end zone every time he touched it. That's what Christian McCaffrey reminds me of on the offensive side. Over on the defensive side, I would say that comes from Fred Warner, although we haven't seen him on the field yet during the offseason program. He's been out there, but not actually participating in practice. But I would say he's the tone setter on the defensive side because he's the vocal one. I know Nick Bosa is the guy that probably makes the biggest difference in terms of his ability to get to the quarterback and those types of things. When it comes to the leadership side, I think it really comes from Fred Warner. I think he sets the tone for the defense overall. And I think it's those two, Christian McCaffrey and Fred Warner, are the top two tone setters for this team.